The Justice Department would review hate crimes against Asians and Pacific Islanders if the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, both chambers of Congress will consider, becomes law. The group Stop AAPI Hate found nearly 3,800 instances of hate incidents in the last year. Dr. Erroll Southers is director of the Homegrown Violent Extremism Studies at University of Southern California. Erroll, it's great to see you again. Thanks for coming on. What should the Justice Department's role be in tracking hate incidents, not just against Asians and Pacific Islanders, but against all kinds of groups? This is especially prominent, of course, because of the pandemic.
Well, Francis, thank you for having me. One of the challenges the Justice Department is going to have is restoring some of the civil rights, if you will, actions that were rolled back in the last administration, and some of the protection of vulnerable populations was reduced. So they're going to have what I interpret as a whole of community engagement on this effort. They're going to have to leverage agencies across both state and local, in addition to obviously, law enforcement. But I would suggest that, as you've mentioned previously, one of the other organizations, we started tracking hate crimes largely due to COVID and stay-at-home orders back in March. And we were working with a group called A3PCON, which stands for Asian Pacific Policy and Planning Council. They're doing the best job right now tracking specifically Asian American hate crimes, particularly due to COVID. So there's a lot of work to do. I also believe that they should reach out to the faith-based community. Most people in times like this who have challenges with the government or other agencies giving them information tend to rely on their faith-based leaders, and I think that would be a good place to start as well.
What is different, if anything, and what is the same in what we're seeing about the wave of violence against Asians and Pacific Islanders compared to the other areas of HVE that you examine, Erroll?
Well, this is clearly driven by COVID-19. It's due to a lot of rhetoric that came out in the last several years. It is, if you will, it is a violence that's been taking place for quite some time and been ignored. And as I talk to many of my Asian American friends, they say they're almost like the silent minority. So this is nothing new. What's coming to light is the fact that it's happening to them. And it's not just one individual or one race that's attacking them. They're being attacked by many people who believe that COVID-19 is a hoax, who believe that there's government overreach and they've stopped their lives. And so that's the reason this is happening. And it's very unusual that the spike has not been noticed until now, that we had to have deaths for people to pay attention. But we've been tracking this for quite some time, and it has been rising every single month.
Are the organizations that should be tracking this inside the federal government the same ones that should be tracking other types of extremism?
Absolutely. It's got to be across the board in terms of interagency and those organizations that are tracking. It's the only way we're going to have a real picture of what's going on. The other challenge we have, Francis, is that hate crimes are largely underreported. Many people don't report either for the fact that they don't believe anything's going to happen, there's not going to be an investigation. And then at the same time, having been in law enforcement, many officers don't understand what a hate crime is. So while they may have a battery, they may have a burglary, they may have an assault, it doesn't get into that hate crime category because of the other categories they investigate.
What will you watch moving forward from the federal government's perspective? What are the expectations that the broader community, the broader citizenry should have from the law enforcement organizations in Washington, or they're based in Washington?
Well, one of the things I'm going to look for is a greater effort towards education and awareness. I think people need to be aware of what's going on. The acknowledgement by this administration that we have a problem with what's called DVEs, or domestic violent extremists, was a first step. I traveled last year before we had stay-at-home orders, and the most prevalent request I got to speak on was homegrown violent extremism attacking houses of worship. And who would have ever thought that that would be a challenge? And many people in those congregations were totally unaware that they were being targeted. So what I look for in the future is an education and awareness outreach effort. I also look for some prevention methods to be shared with people. We know when we're talking about hate crimes, specifically against Asians due to COVID, they're happening in big box retail locations, they're happening in pharmacies. And so those are places that people have decided, maybe I don't want to go there by myself. Maybe I want to make sure I'm protected. I want to be very, very careful when I go in there. The government should take a part to play a role in offering prevention and strategies for personal safety as we go forward.
When you use the term domestic violent extremism, I go immediately to January 6th and the riot at the Capitol building. What's your takeaway from what we're learning about that, the speed with which prosecutions and charges are happening and all of that, Erroll?
Well, first of all, the continuing expanding scope of who was involved in that act of insurrection. Info suggesting that there was planning, coordination, possibly collaboration. I'm impressed thus far with the number of people that are being arrested. We will have to see what happens. Most importantly, Francis, we've got arrests. That's going to happen. We've got a lot of digital information regarding how we are going to identify people. But the American public is going to watch to see how this is prosecuted. And if it's not prosecuted to the full extent of the law, those people who participated in that riot will see this as an Independence Day as it was billed. It'll be a milestone for them in American history going forward.
So you're not concerned about the speed with which these are happening? There's some discussion here in Washington that the prosecutions, the procedures are not happening quickly enough.
I smile because having been in the FBI, I know one thing about the Bureau: they're patient. And so trust me that I'm hopeful that everybody who participated in this way and violated the law will be identified, will be apprehended, and will be prosecuted. I always have to say to people, trust and respect the process. And hopefully this will work out as it has in the past.
Dr. Erroll Southers, it's always delightful to have you on the program.
Thank you, sir.